want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
So, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
I'll do that. Hi, folks. It's Rick Wilson, and welcome back to the Enemies List. My guest today is Fareed Zakaria. You have seen Fareed on CNN. He is someone who has explored a lot of the big cultural and political currents in our lifetimes, and he has an incredibly important new book out called The Age of Revolutions: Progress and Backlash from 1600 to the Present. And having read it, Fareed, I came away from it in some ways feeling a little relieved, because this is not a uniquely chaotic era that we're living in. It's just the most recent big chaotic era that we're living in. Talk to us about what inspired you to write this book, and tell people what the sort of idea of this rolling set of revolutions in social and economic and political change has meant to the world since 1600.
So thanks, Rick, for having me on. It's a real pleasure. I began to think about this book about 10 years ago. And what precipitated it was the Tea Party, because I was watching something that seemed very strange to me in modern American politics, which is the most hierarchical party, the Republican Party. You remember the old line they used to say about presidential nominations: the Democrats have to fall in love.
Right.
Obama, Kennedy, Clinton. The Republicans fall in line. Right? They get the next most senior guy. And instead, what was happening was an insurgency was taking over the party, the Tea Party. Right. And there was a very good book by a Yale scholar that pointed out that while it began as an economic thing, you remember Santelli on CNBC, it very quickly became really a cultural thing. These people were motivated by immigration. They were motivated by all what we would call the woke agenda, abortion, gay rights, and they were reacting to the first Black president in the White House. Oh, yeah. And all of those cultural issues took over the party, and they began to dominate what had otherwise been a party defined by largely economic issues: low taxes, limited government, balanced budgets, to the extent there was a foreign policy, spread democracy abroad. This was a whole new movement. So it began to make me realize something has changed in American politics. And then I began to watch the reaction to Obama, which I thought was very interesting because it broke one of the strongest correlations in predictive polling, which is your sense of the economy always translated into presidential approval ratings. And Barack Obama, under his watch, had the strongest recovery of any major economy from the global financial crisis. And by the end of his term, despite the fact that the stock market had tripled, his approval ratings were basically flat. And it made me realize we were in a new era of cultural politics and a cultural backlash. And so I began to ask myself, how did we get here? What was going on? Why have there been previous periods like this? And that's what took me to the history starting in 1600.
And one of the things that I noted in reading the book is there is a sense of similarity in many of these revolutionary moments. There is this idea that the whole system is corrupt and has to be burned to the ground, and then the revolution kind of turns on itself a bit, and this arc of synthesizing over and over again something driving people toward what they think will be a better world. It doesn't always work out that way, and in one of the few cases, the American Revolution, I think, for as flawed as our origin story is, we almost have built a unique model in the world where it could work if we get back to something that is less hyper polarized than we have right now.
Absolutely. Look, the American founding is a really unique moment, and as I point out, part of what made it work, honestly, was that it wasn't a grand social revolution in the
Right.
style of the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution. It was really, to begin with, just a changing of guard. It was saying we don't want King George. We want
Right.
our own system, and we want something that's closer to a merchant republic. But we kept in place the entire social structure in the South, sadly,
Hmm.
including slavery, but the whole
Sure.
kind of Bourbon elite stayed in power. We kept in place the Northern aristocracy, so that as better than most, the Whiskey Rebellion was a genuine effort to kind
Yes.
of get rid of the property owning
Hmm.
aristocracy, and that didn't work. So it really was quite limited, and then we grew it. And it's sad to say, but it seems that that kind of incremental bottom up revolution of allowing countries to modernize economically, technologically, socially, and then expanding political rights, political freedoms, broadening that works well. It's a sort of sign that human beings, societies can digest change incrementally, and then you can do amazing things. But when you try to do it the way the French or the Russian Revolution did, all at once, massive change,
Hmm.
uh, stick it down the throats of everybody, you get the whole thing goes awry.
I mean, look, when I was writing about this in another context the other day, when you had the French Revolution, you had people like Saint-Just and Robespierre, who were these early revolutionary leaders who became despotic rather quickly because uh, they 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 believed that achieving their ends justified any action. And that's sort of one of the things that scares me about America today is there are people, and I'm not saying exclusively, but the majority, would say, on the right who believe that achieving this set of sometimes loosely defined ideological ends justifies abandoning the progress we've made as a country over the last 240 years. And this idea that you can sort of have just a little despotism, just a little authoritarianism, just a little dictatorship, I that concerns me at a really fundamental level. I don't know. I mean, I think you'd agree with that.
I think you put it exactly right. And it gets at this whole issue of, is Trump a dictator? Look, I don't think Donald Trump thinks of himself as a dictator and aspires to be a dictator. Yeah, he admires a bunch of strong men, but
Sure.
really what it is, he wants to do what he wants to do. And
Right.
he doesn't think that there should be any obstacles or constraints or limitations. And he thinks when he wants to do something, he's going to call up the SEC and say, find this company. And when they say, well, actually, Mr. President, you can't tell the SEC what to do, he'll say, well, I'm going to fire you because I want
Hmm.
somebody who's going to, apparently the people who worked in the White House recall, and we have this all from his aides and his
Sure.
people, that he was sort of stunned to discover that the Attorney General does not think of himself as the president's lawyer, but rather the country's lawyer, right?
Right.
So that's the path. That's the thing I worry most about Donald Trump, is not that he has some full-blown theory of dictatorship that he wants to replace with democracy. No, it's that he wants to exercise power and get whatever he wants done, and he will not allow any of the constraints, limitations. But that is, of course, the genius of the American system and of constitutional democracy, which is that power is constrained. This is,
Hmm.
the famous Federalist 10, Madison saying
Right.
the two most important things is you got to get the government to govern the people, and then you got to get the government to control itself. He says, I think he puts it more eloquently. First, you have to get them to control the people, then you have to get them to control themselves.
It's funny because I recently went back and reread the Anti-Federalist Papers and the Federalist Papers and the minutes of the Constitutional Convention. I know it's pretty nerdy slog, but
But Rick, wasn't it dazzling to think you had that level of political debate taking place?
And these guys were like 19, 20, 25, 30. And I read it. And and I had never read the Anti-Federalist Papers before. And I walked through the whole thing and I was blown away because there was a systemic vision of how you protect rights and constrain the power of the government to abuse them, whether it's at the state or the national level. And this balancing test we came out with has worked pretty, again, imperfectly to be sure, but it has functioned in this way because we're this propositional nation. I think in part because it's not blood and soil. It's this ideal of America. And while I don't think we should ever believe we can escape the cycles of history, it almost feels like we had a greater opportunity because of this country and our origin story to almost do that. I'm not sure I'm articulating it well enough, but I feel like all that brilliance in the establishment of this country and all the sacrifices that were made in throughout time, and with the cataclysm of the Civil War, I feel like we almost have something that I think people are undervaluing what we have and how important it is to save it.
One way of putting what you're saying, Rick, is to compare the French Revolution and the American. They take place basically around the same time, right? Within 10 years of each other. The French have a democracy, it's a good democracy, but in getting from 1789 to where they are today, they went through 5 republics, 2 empires, one proto-fascist dictatorship, and a huge amount of turmoil. And we have had a continuous constitutional existence with one civil war for 250 years. I mean, that is a pretty remarkable achievement. Most people always talk about America as a young country. Well, we're a very young country, but we are a very old republic. We are the oldest constitutional republic in existence. And that the idea that we've been able to maintain that without having a breakdown, as every other country has, is really extraordinary. And it goes to the point you're making. I don't believe in kind of founding father worship, but this was a pretty special moment. And as you say, it actually took both sides. We have the Bill of Rights today only because of the anti-federalists. They were the ones who insisted on putting those things in.
Right. It's funny you mentioned that comparison to the French Revolution, just about the same moment in time. And I mean, I remember back in college reading Burke and Reflections on the French Revolution, or the Revolution in France, whatever the title was. And he said at the time, the French Revolution will fail because it's based on too many abstractions that are vulnerable to human nature, with nothing in their laws to mitigate those things. And I know, folks, for all you Burke fans out there, I'm sure I'm misquoting it. It's been a while since I've read it.
No, you have it basically right. I mean, you're paraphrasing it. Yeah.
But I think that again, I'm almost concerned. You mentioned like a lot of Americans, especially on the conservative side, they say, "Oh, the founders, we want a founders' intention." But really, I don't know that they've really been educated about the founders and their rather more worldly and expansive view of human rights and human nature than I think would fit in with a lot of the things that we hear today from the right, which is increasingly about restricting the rights of other Americans rather than protecting them.
The great story of America, which Tocqueville got right away, was it is a story of the expansion of rights. You put it exactly right. And the genius of America was that it had these ideals. All men are created equal was something really fundamentally due. The idea, even before that, where you had merchant republics like the Dutch or the English. The idea was all Englishmen have these rights, or Dutchmen have nobody.
Venetians have these rights.
All Protestants have these rights at best. But the idea that all human beings have these rights. And so by putting it in those terms and really Enlightenment universalist terms, what you were doing was you were creating an IOU for future generations. This is exactly what Martin Luther King said. He said that the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, is an IOU to all of us who are coming and saying, excuse me, if you look at the words of this thing, I belong. I get the rights too. And we were able to, not easily, but theoretically, there was no problem with expanding the right to include women and blacks because it was inherent in the definition. Clearly, Jefferson, when he said all men are created equal, meant all beings are created equal. And Jefferson knew he was including blacks in that statement. It's absolutely clear. He was racked with guilt about the whole issue of slavery. So we uniquely created this expansive conception. And for people to now, and nobody can argue against it, even those who, as you say, want to restrict these rights, they do it because it's a kind of naked power play in some ways. At this point, it's just a sense of saying, well, we want our spoils. We feel like other people have been given too much stuff, and we deserve it too.
I'm curious. I mean, I feel like we're in the middle of something, maybe not as scopy and as sweeping as some of the other revolutions you describe in the book, but I'm curious what you think about two countries in the world that I think are kind of weirdly ripe for something sweeping in their cultures: Saudi Arabia and China. Two countries that, by any standard, are not freedom centric. They're pretty repressive regimes in a lot of fundamental ways. But I feel like they're both reaching a kind of historical breaking point. Where do you see those two countries going in the next 10, 20 years? Because I think revolutions there, China more particularly than Saudi, I think, have the fundamental chance to really reshape how the world operates.
Yeah, I think you're really onto something when you think about those. When particularly you think about China, what the story in the book is about these huge social economic transformations that then transform society, transforms people's sense of their identities, and then transform politics. Right. So first you get economics and technology changing, if you will, society. People start thinking of themselves differently, and the politics has to catch up and adapt. So China, you are absolutely right. 40 years of heady economic growth, 500 million people moved out of poverty into the middle. It has changed Chinese society, and people began to ask for more autonomy, more freedom, more independence. Not politically. They were asking for it in ways of, I want to work where I want to work. I want to live how I want to live. I want to move to where I want to move to. And most importantly, I think of my life and as autonomous, and I don't need the Communist Party. The Communist Party is becoming irrelevant. That is what Xi Jinping realized when he came to power. If you read his speeches there, his obsession is that China is becoming so open that the Communist Party is becoming irrelevant. And so his whole clampdown is a counter-revolution. It is an effort to stop all this and say, no, I'm happy to sacrifice growth in me because I want control.
For control.
And if you think about the things he's been opining about and decreeing, he says, women need to go back into the kitchen and have babies and have a traditional family. He's saying, I don't want effeminate men on television because he doesn't say this part, but clearly it legitimizes homosexuality. This is like, Xi Jinping is really like a cultural neoconservative. Who's come there, who's decrying all these 60s.
He's fighting against woke.
Exactly. It's all these 60s style, hippies who are changing his country. So the really interesting question is, will it work? In other East Asian societies that went through the same process of ground up revolution that I describe in the book, South Korea, Taiwan, people forget, but there was exactly this counter revolution. The South Korean dictatorship in the 70s and 80s tried to clamp down very hard. The Taiwanese dictatorship, the KMT, were brutal. They opened fire on protesters. They did all kinds of stuff. Eventually, it didn't work, and the systems had to accommodate themselves. So the great question about China is, will that happen? The problem is, unlike those dictatorships in South Korea and in Taiwan, what you have in China is a Leninist dictatorship. It's very tough, very strong, very pervasive throughout society. So I suspect that it will be a much slower process. But I think I'm with you, Rick, that 25 years from now, do I believe that China will have a middle class of 750 million people and they will quietly accept a totally repressive Leninist dictatorship? No. I think there will have been some give, and it may be that there's more pluralism within the Communist Party, that there's more, but I don't believe you can keep a lid on this forever. And if you want it, and people say, well, the Chinese are different, Confucianism is different. Okay, let's look at another Confucian Chinese society, Taiwan. And it's a very different political system because the political system had to adapt. So That's my sense. Saudi is a very interesting question because the crown prince is trying to modernize from the ground up. He's trying to change, the economy. He's trying to change society. It's a very traditional society, but I suspect again you will see. He's not decreeing it from the top. We should actually be thankful that it's not a French Revolution style. Everything is going to open up all at once. By the way, we kind of tried that in Iraq, and it's been a bit of a disaster.
Yeah, so did not work out as we had hoped.
Right. So maybe the incremental process, and what America does very well in these situations with its allies, we did with South Korea, is just push them gently. Just say, like, you can do better. You want to do this. This is in your interest. And and by the way, you can't fire. You can't open fire on. You put some guardrails in. You put some encouragement in. And look at our allies, right? Whether it's South Korea, whether it's Taiwan, whether it's Chile, which is the most advanced liberal democracy in Latin America, that process has worked. We shouldn't forget that American support in many of these countries has led them to be, from Japan and Germany, obviously, to start, has led them to be richer, freer, and more democratic than they had ever been in their past.
I do think that the post-war order that some people think, America imposed a post-war order on the world. I look at it a little differently. I look at it that yes, there was a moment where America's economic and military power was so disproportional that maybe we could have, but it's the old thing. I remember I talked to an East German intelligence officer right after the wall fell, and I said, tell me what it was. Tell me what it was that because he had been cooperating with the U.S. I was at the Defense Department at the time, and he says the lights on at night across the wall. The lights were on at night.
Yeah,
it was something we wanted to see the lights on. He goes, and that wasn't. He goes, weirdly, it didn't just represent America or Germany. He goes, that was what we thought of like America was. The lights were on. Yeah. Everything was. There was a world where there was opportunity and liberty and freedom, and I think that example, with Germany, with Japan, they may be different cultures than ours, but the value of some of the things that we codified and held to for 200, at that point, 215 years or whatever it was, we had something that could be emulated without imposition.
Think about it this way. The 20th century, I always say, this is Biden's good line about him in the election, which is, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. I think there's a version of that you can say about the 20th century. There were 4 or 5 countries that could have become the leading power in the world in the 20th century. The Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Imperial Germany, Imperial Japan, maybe Imperial Britain. I think that the U.S. was clearly a better, more benevolent, more far-seeing, it has been good for the world that the United States ended up the dominant power of the 20th century and not any of those alternatives.
I think that's completely on point and completely correct because, again, I think what that stems from, again, is we had a messy beginning. We have a definitionally propositional country. You're not an American because you were born, because of where you were born. You're an American because of who you become.
Right.
And I think that in a weird way, the example of that's out there, for good and bad, free markets and free individuals and a state that is bounded in its powers to control or harm individuals. I think a lot of people in countries that are more oppressive or who are coming up the development cycle look at that and go, we could never achieve that. But then there are examples they could achieve that. There are ways to get there.
Look at Taiwan is now the freest democracy in Asia, according to all the rankings. It's extraordinary. And I think that, to your point, one of the things Americans don't realize is we beat ourselves up all the time. But it's a great thing. It's because we are so open and introspective, we wash our dirty linen in public, and all our flaws are real. But that's what causes us to move forward. That's what causes us to fix them. And that's, so if you look at even just coming out of the '08 recession, the great financial crisis, we beat up on ourselves the most of anybody. It's all our banks' fault. It's all our financial systems' fault. We're terrible. And in many ways, it gave rise, I think, to the right-wing populism that we see now. But you know what? The Eurozone economy and the US economy in 2008 were the same size. Today, we are twice the size of the Eurozone economy because we got in there, we made the fixes, we did the stress tests, we got our banks to reform. And people don't focus enough on that. Yeah, we're a total mess, but we always pick ourselves up. And that has something to do with the things you were talking about, the openness, the freedom, the autonomy.
I think another lesson I took out of this is it's really hard to turn the ratchet backward of modernity, of progress, of markets, of the idea that we can't close our eyes to a world that's modernizing and changing. And even these more oppressive countries, these countries that are more stuck in a certain social template or cultural template, they can't do it either. At the end of the day, these things are going to happen, and it's a matter of how we try to preserve the upsides, liberty, markets, human rights, more than trying to resist the change. We have to ride it more than fight it, and I guess is one of the things I took away from this.
The central message, in a way, of the book is navigating through this these huge structural revolutions in economics, technology is the key. You're not going to be able to turn them back. Think about AI. Okay, whatever you may think about AI, and we may have all our interesting views, Rick, we're not going to uninvent it. It's not going to somehow go right. It's out of the box. So your choice is to say, how do we navigate through this in a way, exactly as you say, that preserves liberty and autonomy and dignity and all that. And there are better ways and worse ways. And I think, we have a lot of freedom of maneuver. And in some of the cases, we haven't done it as well as maybe we could have. We maybe could have navigated through the internet a bit better in a way that didn't, for example, destroy most of the media landscape in America. But we couldn't have uninvented the internet. That wasn't an option. The issue was, could we have told them, look, these are, we I think sometimes forget that there are a lot of these things that happen because of the public, because, the internet was a Defense Department creation. Even today, the internet, which basically for most people you access through your mobile phone, I don't think most people understand GPS exists and functions because of the United States Air Force. If the U.S. Air Force did not run GPS, your phone would not work. And the most valuable part of it, the mobility part of it, would not work. So, that's where we sometimes make mistakes. But you have to navigate. You can't uninvent.
Well, Fareed, I want to thank you so very much for coming on the show today. We could have this conversation for hours. Folks, the book is Age of Revolutions, Progress and Backlash from 1600 to the present. Fareed Zakaria has given you I don't say this about many books, but it had an inspirational quality to it that about getting through this kind of moment that we feel all very stressed out and concerned and worried about. And that these revolutions can be faced, and that frankly, as Americans, we're in a better position to face them than a lot of folks. So thank you again, Fareed. I appreciate you coming on the show, and best of luck with the book, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Rick. Pleasure to be on.
You know what? The Enemies List today is a cavalcade of clownish jerk-offs. It is a cluster of moronic a-holes. It is a group of people who are behaving in ways that are so juvenile and absurd that it almost needs a whole separate category of an enemies list. I'm in New York today, and I've been joined in the same city by Mike Johnson, Vivek Ramaswamy, Doug Burgum, Byron Donalds. We had Rick Scott here a few days ago. Donald Trump's sycophants are all showing up in the courtroom in New York City. Mike Johnson is barely clinging to power in the House, barely able to keep the lights on and the doors open. And yet he's up here whacking himself off. I guess his accountability buddy on his porn app will alert his son now But he's up here jerking around with Donald Trump. He's up here in New York doing this performative, hair-tearing, shirt-rending show of showing up to support the great dear leader. All these other morons, mooks, idiots, skells, con artists, grifters, carnies, whoever they are, they're showing up here in the same tone. They all want to be vice president, of course, or secretary of something if Trump wins again. They're all showing up here to cause a circus. This is the same strategy they used in the end of the 2020 election. They want to cause a media circus. They want to cause a frenzy. They want to cause trouble. They want to break up and disrupt the court system so Donald Trump can get a mistrial or go free or whatever. These people are being paid to serve the American people in Washington, D.C. They are members of Congress. They are members of the U.S. Senate. And yet, they're spending your time and tax dollars in New York City to support the dear leader in his porn trial, election interference, cover-up trial. You guys, you are so on the enemies list, and none of you are coming off.